The day Daniel was fired, it happened in front of everyone. Not in a private office. Not in a quiet conversation behind a closed door. In the middle of the open floor, with 30 people watching from their desks, pretending to look at their screens but hearing every word. His manager, Greg, stood with his arms crossed and his voice raised just enough to carry. "You're done here, Daniel. Pack your things." That was it. No warning. No conversation. Just those words, dropped like something heavy into a quiet room. Daniel stood still for a moment. His face went through several things at once: shock, confusion, the particular kind of hurt that comes from being made small in front of people who know you. He swallowed it down. He nodded once. He walked to his desk, put his few belongings into a cardboard box, and carried it to the elevator. He pressed the button. He waited. The doors opened and closed. And just like that, 12 years were over. Outside on the pavement, the city moved around him like nothing had happened. Because for the city, nothing had. But for Daniel, everything had. He stood there for a long time. Then he started walking. Daniel Osei was 43 years old and had worked at Callaway & Brand, a mid-sized marketing firm, since he was 31. He had started at the bottom. Junior copywriter. Small desk near the supply closet. He had worked his way up slowly, carefully, doing good work and keeping his head down. By year 5, he was running entire campaigns. By year 8, he was the reason 3 of their biggest clients renewed their contracts. He was not flashy. He didn't take long lunches or talk loudly in meetings. He came in early and left when the work was done. He remembered his colleagues' birthdays. He brought coffee to the team during late nights before big deadlines. He believed in the company. Genuinely. The way you believe in something when you've poured years of yourself into it. At home, he had a wife named Claire and a teenage son named Noah. Claire worked part-time at a dental clinic. They had a mortgage. A car payment. Noah was 2 years from college. Life was not comfortable, exactly. But it was steady. And Daniel had built that steadiness with his own hands, over more than a decade of quiet, faithful work. He thought that counted for something. He was about to find out whether it did. The trouble had started 6 months before the firing. A new regional director had come in. His name was Greg Callaway, nephew of one of the firm's founders, and he arrived with expensive shoes, a loud laugh, and very clear ideas about who he liked and who he didn't. He liked people who laughed at his jokes. He liked people who agreed with him in meetings. He liked the younger staff who looked impressed when he walked in. He did not like Daniel. Daniel was the kind of man who spoke when he had something worth saying. In meetings, he would listen carefully, and then offer a different perspective if he thought it would help the client. He wasn't difficult. He wasn't rude. But Greg experienced his quiet honesty as a challenge. As disrespect. 3 months in, Greg began reassigning Daniel's accounts. Good accounts. Long-standing ones. He handed them to a younger man named Bryce, who had been at the firm for 18 months and who always laughed loudest at Greg's jokes. Daniel said nothing. He kept working. He filed a quiet concern with HR and received a form letter in return. 2 months after that, a major campaign Daniel had built over 4 months was presented by Bryce, without Daniel's name on it. Greg stood at the front of the conference room and called it Bryce's best work. Daniel sat in the 3rd row. He said nothing. At home that evening, Claire could read it in his face before he said a word. She put down the dish she was drying and just looked at him. What happened? He sat down at the kitchen table and told her everything. The campaign. Bryce's name. Greg's voice filling the conference room with praise for work that wasn't his. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she sat across from him. "Are you going to fight it?" she asked. I don't know, he said. I don't know what fighting looks like anymore. That night he lay awake for a long time. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about the 12 years. The late nights. The clients he had won. The campaigns that had kept that company growing during 2 difficult economic periods. He thought about how none of that was in the room when Greg pointed at Bryce and smiled. The next few weeks were quiet and hard. Daniel went to work. He did his job. He spoke when he needed to. He watched the floor shift around him, the way his colleagues seemed uncertain around him now, the way some avoided eye contact, the way others were simply kind in small, careful ways that told him they knew something was wrong. He was being pushed out. He could feel it. Like a slow tide going in one direction. He just hadn't expected it to happen the way it did. The morning of the firing, Daniel had arrived early as always. He had been working on a proposal. A new concept he believed in, a campaign built around community storytelling rather than traditional advertising. He had spent 3 weekends developing it. He thought it might be the best idea he'd had in years. He had requested a meeting with Greg to present it. Greg called him into the center of the office floor instead. What followed was brief. Greg's voice, raised for the room to hear. The accusation that Daniel had gone over Greg's head to the senior partners about the campaign credit issue. Which was true. He had. He had sent one professional, factual email. And Greg had decided that was the end. You're done here, Daniel. Pack your things. Some of his colleagues looked away. One, a young woman named Priya who had worked beside him for 4 years, met his eyes for just a moment. Her face said I'm sorry. Her mouth said nothing. She couldn't afford to. Daniel carried his box to the elevator. He pressed the button. He stood straight. He would not let his face crumble here. The doors closed. He breathed. The first 2 weeks were the hardest Daniel had ever lived through. It wasn't just the money, though that fear was real and constant. It was the silence. The sudden emptiness where a routine had been. He woke up at the same time every morning from 12 years of habit, and then lay there with nothing to get up for. Claire was steady. She picked up extra hours at the clinic. She didn't complain. But he saw the lines around her eyes that weren't there before. He saw her check the bank app when she thought he wasn't looking. Noah tried to help in teenage ways, making coffee without being asked, putting his plate in the dishwasher, being quieter around the apartment. One evening Noah sat beside his father on the couch and said, "You're going to figure it out, Dad. You always do." Daniel looked at his son. The boy believed it completely. No doubt in his face at all. Daniel nodded. "Yeah," he said. But in his chest, he wasn't sure yet. He spent those weeks applying to positions. Sending emails into silence. Updating a resume that felt like a document of someone else's life. He had 2 interviews, both of which went nowhere. But in the evenings, he kept working on that proposal. The community storytelling campaign. The one Greg had never seen. He had nothing else to do. So he worked. About 3 weeks after the firing, Daniel received a message from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Her name was Irene. She had been a client of his at Callaway and Brand, back in year 4. She ran a mid-sized retail brand that had grown significantly in the time since they'd worked together. She had heard through someone that Daniel was no longer at the firm. She asked if he'd be open to a conversation. They met for coffee. Daniel came prepared. He brought the community storytelling proposal, printed and organized, because he brought it everywhere now, the way you carry something you believe in. Irene read the first 3 pages at the table. She turned them slowly. Her face changed as she read. "Who have you shown this to?" she asked. "Nobody," he said. "My old boss never saw it." She looked at him over the papers. That's a mistake that was his, not yours, she said. She told him she was expanding her brand's marketing division. She asked him what he would need to launch independently, not as an employee, but as a consultant. His own operation. Daniel had not thought about it that way. He had been looking for a job. A salary. A structure to step back into. Irene slid the papers back across the table. Think about it, she said. And if you decide yes, I'm your first client. He drove home and sat in the parked car for 15 minutes before going inside. He said yes. It took him 4 days to decide, and Claire was part of every hour of that decision. They sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and worked through the numbers honestly. It was frightening. The margin was thin. But it was real. He registered a small consultancy. He called it simply Osei Creative. Irene's campaign launched 8 weeks later. It was built exactly as Daniel had envisioned, real stories, real people, real communities. No manufactured emotion. No hollow slogans. Just truth, presented beautifully. Within 10 days, the campaign had been picked up by 2 industry publications. A marketing blog called it one of the most authentic brand campaigns of the year. Irene's brand saw a significant spike in engagement, the kind that translated into actual sales. Her team sent Daniel a message: the client feedback is unlike anything we've seen. He read it at his kitchen table, in the same apartment, under the same flickering lamp. He read it twice. Then he set the phone down and pressed both hands flat on the table and just breathed. 3 more inquiries came in within the month. Then 4. Then a referral from one of those to a company that had a genuine budget and a genuine problem only the right person could solve. By month 4, Osei Creative had 5 active clients. 6 months after the day he carried a box to the elevator, Daniel received an invitation. The Marketing Industry Awards, an annual event in the city, respected and well attended. Osei Creative had been nominated. Best New Independent Agency. A category he hadn't even known they were eligible for. He went with Claire. She wore a dark blue dress. He wore the good suit he hadn't touched in months. They sat at a round table with industry people he didn't know yet. He didn't win that category. But something else happened. At the end of the evening, one of the senior partners from Callaway and Brand, a woman named Margaret, one of the original founders, stopped at his table. She had seen the Irene campaign. She had seen the nominations. She looked at Daniel with the clear eyes of someone who understood exactly what had happened under her firm's roof. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I should have paid more attention." Daniel looked at her. He felt the weight of everything that had happened rise up in his chest, and then, quietly, begin to settle. "Thank you," he said. Simply. Nothing more. He didn't need her to explain it further. He didn't need her to fix anything. It was enough. He took Claire's hand under the table and held it. Greg was gone from Callaway and Brand by the following spring. Daniel heard it through Priya, who had finally left too and reached out to say she was sorry for staying silent that day by the elevator. "I've thought about it a lot," she wrote. "You deserved better than that." Daniel wrote back and told her he hoped she was well. He meant it. Osei Creative grew. Not explosively, steadily. The way Daniel had always worked. By year 2, he had a small team. By year 3, he was turning down more work than he was taking, choosing carefully, the way a man does when he finally has options. Noah went to college on a scholarship. Claire cut back her hours at the clinic. The mortgage got a little lighter. One evening, Daniel sat at his kitchen table, the same lamp, and thought about the day he stood on the pavement outside Callaway and Brand with a cardboard box and no idea what came next. He thought about Greg's voice, raised for the room. He thought about the elevator doors closing. He thought about the proposal in his bag that nobody had asked to see yet. And he understood something clearly: the way you only understand things after you've lived through them, being pushed down is not the same as being finished. Sometimes the door that closes on you is the one that was always too small. The right door doesn't shut you out. It waits.